I'll go first. My name is EJ Smith. I am the branch manager for the Child Protection Branch here within the Division of Protection and Permanency with DCPS. So I know that's a lot of acronyms. I'll try to spell some of that out for you so you understand who's who in the work that we do throughout the presentation. But that's who I am.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Crystal Crouch. I am a specialist with the Division of Service Regions. Just wanted to throw out, I know some of you guys on here, because I was a Frisk for 8 years and I served in Anderson County. And I am super excited to be here with you guys today. If you have any questions specifically, you're more than welcome to reach out to me as well.
I am Megan Paris, and I'm Frisk in Jefferson County.
Thank you, Megan. I think we're going to go ahead and let the hosts start the presentation for the sake of time. There's quite a bit of us in here, so we'll let them get started.
Okay. So, like I said, my name's EJ, and I'm the branch manager here. So, I can't see everybody, but so I'll try to, Crystal, if somebody drops a question in the chat or something, we can collect those to the end, or if it's important for me to stop on that slide and kind of answer it, I can do that as well. So if you'll help me with that, that would be great. Like I said, we're here for alternative response today. I'm assuming most of you have at least heard of this, depending on what counties you're serving. Our Southern Blue and Lakes region would have been the most recent implementers in December. So if you're in those areas, it may be a relatively new idea to you. If you're in some of the other areas across the state, you've likely heard of this. So we'll go ahead and get started. So real quick, just some terminology, right? So what I want to start with is kind of what alternative response is not. So alternative response is not a voluntary service. It is not something that families can disengage with before we are able to assess for safety. These are still allegations which meet criteria. So before alternative response would have been live in your region or your county, these are the same cases that would have been investigated before, right? So it's not that different as far as our what we're going to do to assess safety. We use the same safety assessment tools. We use the same risk assessment tools. What we do differently is we have some different tools in our belt for how we engage with families initially and how that ongoing contact with families looks throughout that assessment. So just wanted to clear up some quick terminology there. These are cases that have met criteria. Then once we've decided they've met, just like before, when we still have time frames with investigations, right? 4 hours, 24, 48, 72. Alternative response is kind of a new time frame, right? But it's not a case that didn't meet criteria. So still, you may see when you call in if something doesn't meet. You've seen resource links, I'm sure. You've seen maybe community response in some of the counties. If there are 10 to 12 counties that have community response, community response is a whole different program. I won't get lost in that today. That's another division, but just remember these are the same maybe 48 hour, 24-hour cases that you might have seen in times past. So not a different set of allegations or no different criteria for acceptance, right? We didn't lessen or increase the burden for acceptance. So here, now that's kind of like what it isn't. So what is it? It is a different way to handle reports. It's used when concerns don't involve serious harm or require urgent response. And that it's really important. The second bullet, I want to leave just a few minutes on. It's not about the risk level. I think a lot of times that word might get misused when we're talking about, maybe this case is low risk and that's the only thing that can go alternative response. The situation that happened could have been a very high risk situation, but by the time our agency is made aware of it, maybe there's something in the allegation that tells us there's not a need for urgent response. The example I like to often use is maybe some kind of criminal event in which we weren't notified till after, and law enforcement didn't necessarily do anything, but we know about an event that happened. But now we're hearing that grandma found out about this event, and she went and took the kid to her house and told her daughter, like, I'm going to have this kid until they sort this out. Okay, well, we need to look into it, right? It's still a very high risk situation for that kiddo if that were to continue. but based on the report we have, this kid is not in any kind of imminent danger and doesn't need our response. And I always like to compare it to maybe some other fields that you all may be very familiar with and work with, like law enforcement and or emergency room staff. There's a triaging that has to happen, right? So there's a difference between having an active heart attack and saying you had some chest pain yesterday, and you just want to be checked out, right? So we still want to look at it. We're still concerned about it. We still want to make sure you have what you need moving forward so nobody gets hurt, or no negative outcomes happen. But we can't treat everything the same, right? So there's less time spent also in alternative response because we'll talk about the things that can't go down alternative response paths later, but there's less time spent worrying about proving whether or not the accusations are true. So it's less about fact finding to say, hey, I got you. This thing happened, right? Because that's really not, it's important in a lot of cases, and we'll get to those cases later and why that's obviously important in those cases. But in a lot of these cases, we're talking about families that, yes, something negative may have happened, but what are we going to do to, fix that situation so that it's not repeating itself, and so that we can actually help build and sustain this family safely together. And again, same thing, less emphasis on who's at fault. There is not going to be any kind of substantiation or unsubstantiated finding. It's just going to say alternative response. So if it stays in the alternative response path, there is no risk of being like on a central registry or anything like that. It obviously works on building safety to get the families involved and working together instead of feeling like we're at it's more relational as opposed to transactional. It's very hard to get people to buy in that we're here to help when we have went and talked to everybody without their permission, and we're being very forceful in our language and things like that. And so it obviously works on trying to work upstream with these families, right? When we're in here on this situation where clearly if it went alternative response, there are supports, somewhere. Because if there wasn't, it would have been needed a more urgent response. So what are we going to build on those? What was it? Grandma? Was it your neighbor that helped out in that high risk situation? Who was it that was helping you? And how can we put those systems in place? Maybe if there is a next time, or is there another way we need to look at it? So certain goals, obviously, we have with AR is the primary goal is always protection. I think whenever we launch something new, we do a really good job of saying like, here's all the new things we can do in this program, or here's how we can better support families. And sometimes we fly over that in no way changes our primary goal as an agency. Safety is our number one concern. It will always be our number one concern. So if something comes in as AR and we get out there and there's something significantly different going on than what was reported, and we may talk about this later, we have the ability to escalate that response and make sure that these children are protected. Again, it's not like, oh, it's AR, so we don't have a right to see the kid. We have an obligation per statute to make contact with these children and assess their safety. So that's always the primary goal. And the belief that families want to fix the problem. I know we hear a lot of the really horrific cases in the news and things like that. Those are a very small population of the cases that our agency comes in contact with. And so the foundation of this is believing that they really do want to fix the problem. They might not know how, they might not understand why a certain thing in their life has impacted their family in this way. But we do believe at the root of it that they do want to fix the problem and support their children and have a safe environment. They're obviously all unique, right? Every family is different. We don't need to make a cookie cutter design where every family has to do this class. You would get out there, oh, well, you're here, here's this class, do this, and everything's good. They're very unique. Families are made up of more than their difficulties, right? We get involved because of a really negative event or alleged event that's occurred. There's a lot more going on in these families than just that one-time event, especially when we look at school-age children, since we're speaking with you guys. If we get a case on a third grader and it's the first time we've been out there, there were some things that were going right before. I really have a hard time believing that at 8 or 9 years old, you didn't have some supports in place in the past or something when a difficult situation came up. So trying to reach back to those and saying, what's different now? Why was this the time that now it led to a negative outcome? and maybe rebuild those things if those are no longer there. And then, of course, based on that, we believe supports um, are made by connecting them with the right people and the right resources. So you have to have both of those, not just the resources, but then the right people providing those resources to them that they can communicate with, not only during our investigation, but after the fact. Because we're going to exit these homes at some point. These kids are going to be out of school at some point. So it's our job to connect them to somebody that they can reach out to in all kinds of different times of their lives. So this is just a little graphic that kind of shows what I wanted to talk about when I say there's a lot of things that are the same. And I think we do a really good job of pointing out the right side of this chart as opposed to the middle. And so these are really basic things about the response time. So in alternative response, we have 5 days to make contact with the family. We are able to call the family and set up that appointment. And the family actually has the option to say, I'd rather this be an investigation. Those are pretty rare circumstances. Just to give you a quick example that we see often, and that is if there's a custody dispute of some kind, and you have a parent alleging that another parent did whatever they did, sometimes that, there's perpetrator wants a actual finding. They want a document that says this did not happen, right? Because they're going to use that and have their day in court with their custody hearing, and they want that, and that's fine. We're able to do that. We also have the option to interview families together. In an investigation, we have very clear procedures for having these private interviews, and we don't have that restriction in alternative response. We have that ability, right? So the other thing I want to note here is that everything you see on the left side of the screen, we can do an alternative response. We just don't have to. When it's assigned as an investigation, there's unannounced home visits, things like that are mandated. We have to. That's how they have to be done. So alternative response doesn't take tools away from our agency. It just adds a few for some of these cases that don't need such an urgent, intense response. And so again, in the middle, we have same safety assessment. We can still do safety plans with families. Still a lot of services that we can offer them, and we still have the same amount of time to complete them. And we still have the same extension capabilities for working with them, past that 45 days if need be. So acceptance criteria or eligibility is another word we use here. So investigation, right? We're talking about serious harm, urgent response. So it could be any sub-program. It could be environmental, right? Because you'll see on the left side, environmental neglect isn't one of them. But if the environment has caused serious harm to that child, right? Like say the environment has to do with exposure to illegal substances, right? And the child got into those substances and now at the ER, struggling because they've ingested something, right? That would be serious harm, and we need to respond, right? It's not one of these other categories. Sexual abuse, the automatic disqualifier. Physical abuse is the same. Now, I want to note here that threat of physical abuse can go alternative response. So if there's, allegations about somebody threatening to spank or to harm them or something like that, depending on the situation and in full context, it possibly could go down the alternative response. But if we get a report that a physical altercation did occur and there's injuries, that's where it lands in the physical abuse category, and it is a disqualifier. Of course, child fatalities and near fatalities, human trafficking, intimate partner violence. The differentiator here I want to note is the difference between intimate partner violence and just maybe general domestic violence or family violence. So the example I like to use here is maybe you have a multi-family home, right? So you have a grandmother and a mother and then a child. Say mom and grandma got into like a spat over something, and the child witnessed it, or there was a concern that they could have been harmed because they were tussling in the same room. Then that could potentially be threat of physical and go in alternative response. If it's actually intimate partner violence, it's mom and dad, spouses, partners, then we leave that in the investigation realm. And then, of course, substance affected infant. Currently, for a short time in some of the regions that were early implementers, you may have seen or heard that if it was only THC, we let those go to alternative response, but all other substances we left as investigation. We've now changed that just because there was a lot of confusion around that. So it's just any substance affected infant now. And that's substance affected infant, just for a quick definition, is a child who's born who is positive for a non-prescribed substance and or is experiencing withdrawal from a prescribed substance. So, and then reports where safety intervention has been implemented by law enforcement or court. So this is back to that example I mentioned about maybe an arrest or a citation of some sort. In the first example I gave you, the law enforcement didn't do anything about it. Maybe they let them go or whatever. This is a situation where maybe there was a DUI. There's a kid in the back seat. Mom's going to jail. Law had to call the law enforcement officer had to call grandma. Grandma showed up on scene, took the baby home, baby safe, and now we get the call. We were for a short time taking those as AR. We've also switched that back to investigation, mainly because it really caused a lot of confusion again within the court system when there's criminal charges happening. And if they would have called us that night, the difference was we would have went. We would have had to do the same thing. We would have been talking to grandma because mom was going to jail or dad was going to jail. So somebody had to step in, right? There was an urgent response needed. In those cases, there were just other agencies, whether it be law enforcement, court, or medical providers who have a statutory ability to hold a child or to make other arrangements for the child's safety. So we did those. So again, on the right side, you'll see some basic stuff about basically the opposites of that, and then some of the other sub programs that we have: educational neglect, supervision, inadequate shelter. Again, some of those you see and you think, wow, some of those could be really bad, right? And if that's true, then and they're an urgent response, then they'll flip over to investigation anyway. So it's not like when we see it on centralized intake side that we say, oh, you're alleging lack of supervision. Well, that lack of supervision call is about there's a child actively outside or in danger right now. That's an urgent response. We're going to get with law enforcement. We're going to go out there. But if it's on Monday, I've seen that, Susie got out of her house and was in the yard for 45 minutes unattended. I don't know where the parent was. I'm worried about mom's, supervision. And you're calling on a Thursday. If something bad's happened, it's already happened in a sense, and you didn't give us any indication this is actively still going on. So yes, we'll follow up with that family, but we don't know that anything urgent is happening at the moment. So let's see. So our work with families. Whoops. So within 1 day of receiving the report, we're going to call the caregivers to set up that initial visit. Like I said, we have 5 days, but we're encouraging the staff that does not mean we wait 5 days, and we've never done that with any of our timeframes. Our timeframes are just some guardrails basically to help us prioritize work. But we're asking our staff to call within the first day, right? Because if we're really going to attempt to engage the family and do this in like a team format, we can't call on day 4 and say, we got to see you tomorrow. Hope your schedule is free. That's not really gonna to sell that point, right? And I think it also gives us an opportunity to make that contact pretty early on. And we can usually there's signs about maybe evasiveness, tone, things that you may pick up on a phone call when you're having an initial discussion that may lead you to believe maybe there's some other things going on here that I need to be more on heightened alert for. And we can use our professional judgment to then, like I said, if we need to use some of those extra tools, whether that's an unannounced visit, whether that's a phone call to a collateral, we can use those tools. But this is another opportunity to contact the family and kind of see where they're at. And then, of course, within 5 days, we have to make face-to-face with the family, the victim, or the alleged victim, child included, of course. That's where we'll tell the family what the concerns are. We get to know and understand what the problems are. And then we're trying to link the services pretty quickly, right? Because these are cases we want to, and we believe based on their, the level of urgency that this can be supported pretty quickly if we can just get the right pieces in place. Okay, so pathway switches. are some of the same capabilities. So we can do safety planning, like I said, just like we can in investigations. We can choose to talk to other people if we need to, and we can change the report from an investigation and go to an investigation, go to court, right? So again, I like to really focus on the idea that we didn't take away any um, tools from our staff, right? There's not because of this initial decision to go AR, it doesn't then handcuff staff into doing it a certain way, right? They have the same duty to assess safety, and they need to utilize court, things like that, then they can do that. What I'll tell you is so far, so we implemented AR in the fall of 23, and things started in Northeastern and Two River service regions. We are now fully statewide. Uh, right now, we're hovering around the 9% mark for pathway switches. So out of all the intakes we get, about 30 to 35% of those go to AR, right? So this still means basically 65 to 70% of the time, this is business as usual. Nothing's changed. But in those small set of cases, out of those, about 9% of those, there's something that happens that elevates them, right? So what that tells me from a statistical point of view is that we're not far off on getting these to the right place, right? If only 9%, say we have 100 ARs and only nine of them, end up in a different place, that means we're doing a decent job of screening them initially. That this is going down the right path. And so we're watching that very closely. I'm evaluating that change over the different regions as we've implemented. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as we get further into the implementation phases. Well, here's the slide I was just telling you about. So initially, we're seeing about 35% go to AR. This has increased just a touch on the pathway switch. It looks like so. I think this data might be just a little bit delayed from the 9% I told you. But it ebb and flows a little bit, but it's never been. I think the highest I've ever seen is 11%. It got up to 11. It's dropped to 7. It kind of floats there, and that's really the nature of human service work, right? Like it's not super predictable, but you can make generalizations over time when you have enough volume in cases to evaluate. All right, so this is a quick page directed, obviously at the group we're talking with today. So what could this mean for you all? What this could mean is potentially increased communication. I know probably communication with our agency is very different depending on what part of the state you're in. I know I've heard some are very active with their local DCBS staff. Some, have to pull teeth. I would be interested in, not that we want to point out people or anything like that, but please reach out to me and Crystal if you feel like you're trying to be of service to our agency and you are just not getting any feedback from the local office. We'd like to know about that because I don't know if it's some staff don't understand the resources that you all have and that the understanding that we're on the same, we have the same goals a lot of times, maybe not in specific in our employee evaluations don't look exactly the same because we do different jobs, but ultimately we're trying to support these families to make sure they have everything they need and that they're safe. So I don't want to feel like in certain part of states we are at odds with each other. So if there is any places you want us to target to facilitate some of those conversations, please let us know that. That's something we can definitely work on. So you could see some increased communication because as we've trained AR and made staff familiar with this mode of like making sure that we are trying to like just wrap these people up in as much service as we can so that they can support themselves outside of, because we don't have a magic wand here, right? Like I don't have a magic wand to walk out of this house and make everything perfect and us never see them again. Just like you all don't during the school day. You can't just wave a magic wand over this kid and everything's gonna be fine all summer and all the things. But if we work together within our communities, there's enough resources, I believe, that we could make sure that even if this family is going from crisis to crisis and just barely making it, there's supports there along the way that can facilitate their safety. So what I also hope to see, like I said, is stronger collaboration. And then what I do want to point out is the potential change, right? So you may be very used to, you make a report within a day or two, you see a worker at the school interviewing this kid. maybe a collateral. I would say, I mean, I know in practice when I was in the field, it was a very regular routine thing for me to text our Frisk and show up at the school. And while I was there, I would walk to their office and say, "Hey, what's going on with this kiddo?" Even when they weren't the reporting source, right? Even if it was somebody else, when I went to see the kid in the school, I knew you all were the people that had a really uh, good, heartbeat on what's going on in the school with certain populations. So we would definitely want to communicate there. But what you may notice is that you made a report, it's AR. I never seen the worker. Know that that may be because when we talked to the family, they wanted to have that first initial contact at home altogether, right? And if that's what they want to do, then that's what we're going to try. Doesn't mean we can't come to the school if we need to, but we're just trying to avoid that if it's not necessary to assess for safety, right? So you may notice that that difference. And then I wanted to leave, like I said, plenty of time for any questions you all may have. That's a very quick introduction to it. It's more nuanced than that, of course, like everything is. But is there anything as you're hearing those things that they immediately have questions, or you're already experienced, right? Like some of you probably have had months of hearing about AR and several cases that you've reported that have been taken as AR. So any questions at all about anything?
EJ, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Is this something that coordinators will hear from someone and or like, do coordinators need to make the move to reach out? How, if they're not hearing about AR already, how does that look, I guess?
Yeah. So about AR in general, I mean, there's a possibility that you won't hear from staff because there's not a requirement for collateral contact. However, there's been a lot of work that we've done with staff to make sure that we know the difference between, well, just because there's not a need for collateral contact for fact finding, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking to families like, hey, do you know about this resource at your school? Would you like us to put you in contact with them? So I'm hoping that's kind of where you'll hear the AR story, is that you won't hear it from a sense of like, well, we think something's really bad going on here, because those are probably the ones that are switching to investigation, that 9% I was talking about. What I'm hoping is that over time, we'll learn that you all are a very valuable resource. And I think a lot of people know that across the state. But this is a different um, mindset shift in some of the work that we do, that we're saying we're the ones that are going to engage these services with families and going to like we're going to make that soft handoff. We're not just going to say, hey, do you know about Frisk at your school? Hey, do you want me to call them and maybe we'll do like a joint call? Or maybe they know about some meeting that's coming up at school. Like, do you know they could attend this meeting too and maybe supply, whatever the needs are for you. Is that okay with you? So, um, but you should be, when you all make a report, obviously you get that notification whether or not it met or not. Um, so I mean, if you're not hearing from staff, then you're more than welcome, obviously, to reach out and say, hey, I know I made a report, I know it was accepted. Have they been offered this service? Do they know about us? We'd love to help, however we can. So that's how I think you'll hear about AR for the most part, if you haven't already.
So are there designated staff people at local DCBS offices that just focus on AR?
So I think Crystal can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we have any more pockets of that. I think we had a couple of counties that were kind of hanging on to that because uh, it was a good idea, kind of in theory. But based on like I said, with human service work, we can't necessarily predict what's going to come in. So trying to balance caseloads and things like that kind of got tricky. And the truth of the matter is, some of the work that we're doing in AR, we want that to bleed over into the other work. The thought that families are the experts of their life, that families want to make these changes, that we want to be respectful. It's one of those ideas that, I think um we don't want to go all the way on every case when that's not necessary, right? Like if we can team up together and do this in a respectful manner, I want them to feel like DCBS is here to support them, right? Now we all know there's cases where that's just not going to happen, right? We have to step in and we have to do the things that that the law allows us to do to protect these kids. Um, but there's a lot of cases that that's not the case, and there's a lot of times I think if we were to all look back over our time interacting with families, that if there wasn't this fear of if I told you the truth, what are you going to do with that knowledge, and being scared that this little piece of information may mean my kid's being removed when that's not really true, and then they missed out on a service because they were too scared to ask for help, right? And so that's kind of the mindset shift that we're wanting to make. So we're hoping some of that bleeds through. So no, currently in all the counties, the same investigative staff are working both of these types of referrals. So they should be well versed in both. And obviously, since we can switch, it really got tricky in some of the areas where you start with ARX switches. Do you switch teams? It's really
Yeah.
confusing for families. So it just made more sense to cross train everybody.
That makes sense. I'm just thinking of ways to collaborate together, and at the very
Sure.
least, I think that coordinators could provide the staff with info sheets or brochures that they can take with them if they are visiting families,
M-
and just let them know they're
Yeah,
there.
my suggestion would be every local office should be having a regular staff meeting on a monthly basis. So if you reach out to the supervisors in your local county and say, hey, is there a chance I could get on and come speak to your staff during a staff meeting? They should be more than welcoming to allow you to do that. And then at that meeting is when you could certainly provide, here's some, forms, here's the resources that if you want to give these out, during these cases, we'd love for you to share this with families. I think that would be a great opportunity for you all to connect and make sure that everybody in the county knows exactly what you can and can't do, and that collaboration.
I just want to jump in for a second. I think it's important that, when we were training our own staff in regards to alternative response, one of the things that our workers were very concerned with was resources. And I know that Frisk is constantly updating the resources that are available to your families, which I don't think that sometimes our workers have the access to some of the things that you know. And the reason I say that is I came from the social work world, went to Frisk, and I learned more from Frisk about resources than I ever learned being frontline staff with CPS. And it's not because they weren't there, it was because my time was full with initiating reports and, doing the things behind the scenes that I needed to do for frontline work like that. And you guys have so much information that is just you're being inundated all of the time, and you're a wealth of knowledge. And, I learned so much more about the resources available in my community as a Frisk than I did as frontline. So I think it's important to know that we gave that information. We said, if you need help finding resources, contact your local Frisk workers. They may be able to, help you with finding the resource that your families need. So it is really important to partner together and work together for those things.
Thank you, Crystal. Does anyone have any other questions for EJ and Crystal or feedback?
I think everybody's hungry, Beth.
Someone has a question here in the chat. It looks like their mic's not working, so we'll give them a minute to type it if they want. I think this is good. I think it will strengthen that relationship with Frisk and DCBS, which, ultimately just helps the families and the children. So I think that's always a win.
And we're also explaining this to families. That initial call that I was talking about, we are making sure they understand the difference between what an alternative response is and investigation. We're hoping that kind of takes that guard down when you hear that, like, we're not making a finding here. We're not here to say you abused or neglected your child. We're not making an ultimate finding at the end of this case. We're here because this was alleged to have happened. The details of it aren't necessarily important. They are in certain cases. We all know those cases, but really it's about what can we do so this doesn't happen again, right? We want to stop them from going further in the pool, right? They got their toe in. We don't need them in the deep end. Like let's get them out now and make sure everything's good. Okay, so when you have a case taken, such as they are, what communication should occur with us? Almost every time there is no communication. You mean every time with an AR? I don't know how to support AR. So if you're not seeing it with a lot of the AR cases, okay. So if it's in general, this is the county or an area that I would encourage you to reach out to that supervisor and try to engage with staff there. If that doesn't work, you can reach back out and we kind of try to start figuring out what the problem is, because there should be some communication. I mean, if you're saying in general that you're never hearing from a local staff member, then that's just a misunderstanding of what role maybe you have and in what ways we can use you, in a positive way, of course, not use you in a bad way, but use your expertise to help get to the same mutual goal, right? So yeah, if we're not hearing from DCBS staff, we really need to reach out to them and engage in those small communities, because those supervisors and those local staff are really going to be your point people, right? If they don't know you exist and they don't know what you have, then you're never going to really be involved in the families that we're involved with. You're going to only be involved in that school setting, and we won't cross over like we should. And that doesn't even mean about families, like specific families, because there will be times families do not want us to reach out to you, right? And if it's just AR, like we're not going to be able to. But if we know, we can still document that we made them aware of risk, that we left them whatever the resource is. And that way, maybe there's still that fear that if I tell CPS this, there's a risk my kid leaves here, right? Whereas if I can just get them done, then maybe I can go talk to somebody at school, and maybe there's all kinds of things that are going through people's mind. We often forget that we're knocking on this door and giving our speech in a 5-minute period, the same speech we've given 400 times this month, and we know every in and out. And this family's mind is just spinning. Like, what does all this mean? Where are my kids going to go? Are they going to go somewhere? And if they're really struggling with something, they've got the weight of that on the other side of it, right? If everything's perfect, you're fearful if a government agency knocks on your door and asks about your parenting skills, much less if you're actually struggling because your kid has some kind of maybe a special need or is struggling in a certain area with behaviors, and you don't know how to handle this. And now the government's concerned about how you're handling it, so it can be very scary for families, and we don't want that to necessarily be the view. But we know that while we don't want it to be the view, we do know that we have that that element of, or that at least perceived power, right? We're not oblivious to the power dynamic that a government agency knocking on your door is. So, but yes, please reach out to the local counties and see if you can get on their agenda for a staff meeting.
It might be a good idea too, if you do get on their agenda, just to maybe be prepared with a short, elevator speech, maybe a short presentation if they have time. Because I know there's a lot of staff turnover sometimes, and that can be a barrier. So just maybe consistently at some point, maybe yearly, re-educating and just.
Yes. So that's a good idea, because what we did in my local county, and I'm sure some of you probably have experienced this, when I was a supervisor in the local county, we had, during some of the school staff onboarding at the beginning of the year, we would go do like a new training about acceptance criteria and how to report and all this stuff. And that would be a great opportunity for the inverse of that to happen, right? For Chris to come to the staff meeting maybe in July or in August, right when school's getting started, September even, when everything's getting rolling, everybody's back in. That'd be the perfect time to refresh the staff, whoever is there new maybe this year. Say, hey, just remember, this is the Family Resource Center, and here's what we can do for you. And here's what's new that we didn't have this last year, but this is the new thing. Or we had this last year, but we don't have this. So I think that's a really good idea, Beth.
And I'm gonna on that too. I think it's really important that that workers understand what you guys can do and what you cannot do. So when you're doing those presentations, absolutely like explain to them about what your components are and what those things are that you are able to assist with, and but also let them know like first do home visits. And I mean, you guys can be eyes and ears too for our families, and that's assisting our workers as well. If we all work together, we can absolutely help our families better. One of the things that they say in our training all the time is the problem, the family's not the problem. And so, we really are trying to focus on eliminating the problem for the family or assisting the family in understanding how to eliminate the problem. um, and so I know that, between Frisk and the services that they have available and the services that CPS has available to them, we can assist our families in some of those things. One more thing that I felt like was very impactful when we were doing our trainings with our workers was we had a worker who had a case and was really trying every way to help this family and could not come up with the resource that they needed in order to help this family. The thing that he took from that was if I can't help them as a professional, how can I expect that they can find this on their own? And I know that that hits a lot of my Frisk family, right in the gut because we are constantly trying to come up with as many resources we can to help our families, but sometimes there's just not that resource. So we all have those challenges, but I feel like between the things that Frisk has readily available and the things that CPS has available to them, we can really help our families overcome a lot of the problems that boil up to the surface.
Okay, anyone else have anything else they want to share or questions for them before we move to the survey? Does anyone want to share of a strong collaboration they have with their DCBS? What that looks like?
I have experience making one of the alternative response referrals, and so they were phenomenal about back in touch with us as the school staff and with me and our principal to make sure that we were working together to help that family. So that was a positive experience that we had. I spoke with the mother because at first, she was very upset at first because she thought that it was something a lot more serious, but I explained to her that it was just a great resource to have, that DCBS was not there to take her children, but to find ways that we could help her and that we could work together to make, to do things for her family, to get her in touch with like different places and different services that were provided. So that was my experience with it. That's the only one that I have, but so far it's been positive. Just, knowing that they're following through and they keep us in the loop, like as things happen with that family, like they're really good to update us. So we get emails from time to time, just, letting us know like things that the family's going through and if there are any needs that maybe the kids haven't told me at school, because the kids are really good about letting me know if they need something. And the mom and I have a really good relationship. So after I explained to her that it wasn't a report on like a threat, it was a report to help them get in touch with the resources that they needed, because you all may be more aware of things that could help them than what I am. And so it was a way to link together those resources, not to punish them, but to try to find ways to help them overcome whatever obstacles that they have. So, but my experience was good.
I think that's a great example of how we can utilize one another. You had that rapport built, you were able to ease her mind, and that probably helped her feel comfortable being, accepting that help.
Can I ask you what county that is?
Morgan, Morgan County.
Morgan?
hmm
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions or you guys don't want to share any more feedback, I will go ahead and post the survey in the link or the link to the survey. Sorry. Um, right now in the chat. And remember, this is recorded, so if you want to go back and look at it and kind of look at some of those slides that broke it down, I thought those were really helpful on the difference between alternative response and investigation. It will be on the Training Hub, so it might take a couple days, but we will get that posted.
And I'll just note that if there are stories like the positive one there out of Morgan, we'd love to hear about that. When things are going well, we'd like to encourage that and try to figure out maybe what is working there. We often hear a lot of and our workers hear a lot of negative feedback um, when things go bad. But when things are working, it's always nice to hear encouraging words like that. And I've also dropped an email in the chat, DCBS child protection at ky.gov. That should be I'm just double check it now that when I see it like that, it makes me think it's not right. Yeah, that's right. DCBS child protection. That is our branch inbox, right? So if you ever have a general question about policy or procedural things, not necessarily case specifics, right? We don't, my branch handled the case specifics, but if you are seeing a pattern or something that you don't understand why this is happening this way, or question about AR or something like that, you can drop us an email there. My staff monitor that box daily, and we can uh, put you in contact. Or if you can't find out who to contact, maybe you've tried to call, you cannot figure it out. You can reach us there, and we can get you in touch with whoever you need to get in touch with.
Thank you. And for the sake of the recording, I'm just going to say it verbally and then we'll end the recording. It's DCBS Child Protection at ky.gov.